The prison gates groaned open with a metallic scream, the kind of sound that settled deep in your chest and stayed there. Razor wire glinted under a pale afternoon sky as guards barked orders and boots echoed across concrete. This wasn't a place for reputations, only survival. In a slow-moving intake line, a man stepped forward wearing plain clothes and an expression so calm it felt out of place. Steven Seagal kept his head down, eyes steady, posture relaxed. To everyone watching, he looked like just another older inmate trying not to draw attention. Inside, the air was thick with noise and tension. Steel doors slammed, voices clashed. Somewhere down the corridor, laughter burst out, sharp, predatory, practiced. In prison, weakness was a scent, and the bullies were already sniffing. They scanned the new arrivals, measuring shoulders, testing eyes, cataloging fear. When they noticed Steven's silence, they smirked. Quiet meant easy. Calm meant breakable. Or so they thought. As Steven passed through the yard for the first time, eyes followed him from every angle. A shoulder brushed his arm, too deliberate to be an accident. A comment floated past his ear, low and mocking. Steven didn't react. He didn't stiffen or glare. He simply kept walking, breathing evenly, as if none of it mattered. That was mistake. Number one for the men watching, confusing restraint with fear. The yard buzzed with unspoken rules. You either chose a side, proved yourself fast, or became a target. Steven chose none of the above. He sat alone on a bench, hands resting loosely on his knees, gaze unfocused yet alert. Every movement around him registered, footsteps, shadows, shifts in tone. He was listening without listening, seeing without staring. Years of discipline lived in that stillness. Across the yard, a trio of bullies exchanged looks. One cracked his knuckles. Another grinned, already imagining how this would go. They'd done this 100 times, push a little. Laugh louder. Make the quiet, one snap or fold. The guards were close enough to intervene, far enough to let lessons be taught. The stage was set, what none of them understood. What would soon become painfully clear was that silence can be a choice, and calm can be a weapon. Steven Seagal wasn't here to prove anything. He wasn't here to posture. He was here to survive on his terms. As the bullies stood and started walking his way, the yard seemed to hold its breath. They thought they were about to make an example. They had no idea they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. The yard had a rhythm to it, a crude pulse that every inmate learned to read. Conversations rose and fell like waves, laughter snapped into silence, and eyes never stopped moving. Steven felt it immediately. The subtle shift that happened when predators picked a target. He didn't look up, didn't change pace. He knew the rule better than anyone. Attention feeds aggression. It started small, a low chuckle from behind him. A comment tossed like a pebble, meant to test distance. New guy's quiet, someone muttered. Loud enough to be heard, soft enough to deny. Another shoulder brushed past him again. Harder this time. The kind of contact designed to demand a reaction. Steven steadied himself and kept walking, the corners of his mouth neutral, his breathing slow. He took a seat on the same bench as before, posture open, hands relaxed. He wasn't hiding, he just wasn't playing. Across the yard, the trio watched. One was tall and broad, with arms inked in crude symbols. Another had restless eyes and a grin that never quite reached them. The third leaned back against a weight rack, chewing something and enjoying the show. They were used to fast results. Fear, anger, submission. Steven gave them none of it. That bothered them. Hey, the tall one called out, testing the water. Steven didn't turn. The grin widened. The second man stepped closer, stopping just short of invading personal space. You deaf? He asked. Still nothing. A few nearby inmates glanced over, sensing entertainment. Phones weren't allowed, but eyes were better than cameras in a place like this. Stories spread faster than footage. The bullies circled wider now, making it obvious. One paced behind Steven's bench. Another stood to the side, blocking a clean exit. The third stayed back, the conductor of the moment. Steven registered their positions without moving his head. Distance, angles, balance points, tension would be a tell. Man's got nerves, the tall one said louder, or no brains. Laughter followed, forced and sharp. Stephen finally looked up, not at them, but past them, eyes soft, expression unreadable. It wasn't defiance. It was acknowledgement without invitation. That, too, annoyed them. They escalated. A foot hooked the leg of the bench, nudging it. Stephen's weight shifted, but he didn't flinch. A hand flicked the brim of his cap. He didn't reach for it. Silence stretched. The bullies expected something, anything, to justify the next step. When it didn't come, impatience crept in. Say something. The restless one pressed, stepping closer. Stephen met his gaze briefly, calm and steady, then looked away. No challenge. No apology. Just calm. The yard seemed to lean in. At that moment, it was clear. This wasn't about respect anymore. It was about control, and control, once threatened, demanded a response. The tall one cracked his neck. The conductor nodded once. Stephen stood slowly, unhurried, as if answering a bell only he could hear. He didn't square up. He didn't clench his fists. He simply stood, giving space rather than taking it. That choice confused them. Power, in their world, always rushed forward. The conductor scoffed. "That's better," he said. "Thought you were furniture." Stephen said nothing. "Before this goes any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? What city and country? Now think about this moment with me. If I were standing in that yard watching 3 guys circle a calm, silent man, I'd be thinking, this is the point where most people mess up. I'd tell myself if I react too fast, I give them what they want. If I react too late, I lose control. I'd probably choose to stay still, read the room, and wait for the right second. Because in places like this, timing is everything. Your turn. Write it in your own words." The bullies mistook Stephen's stillness for hesitation. The restless one leaned in again, closer than before, breath hot with mockery. "You don't belong here," he said. Stephen finally spoke. Just 2 words, low and even. "Move back." It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it landed. For a beat, nobody laughed. The conductor raised an eyebrow, surprised. The tall one smirked, masking irritation. "Or what?" he asked. Stephen didn't answer. He shifted his weight, barely noticeable, placing his feet where they needed to be. The movement was subtle, almost lazy, but it changed everything. He wasn't preparing to fight. He was preparing to end it quickly if he had to. The conductor took a step forward, deciding this had gone on long enough. "You think you can talk like that in here?" he said, voice rising. "You think—" A whistle blew from the far end of the yard. A guard shouted. Eyes on the cluster. Not close enough to intervene, close enough to warn. The moment tightened. Stephen exhaled, slow and deliberate. They felt it, even if they didn't understand it yet. This wasn't a man hoping to survive the next 5 minutes. This was a man who had already decided how it would end. They took another step in, and that's when they crossed the line they wouldn't be able to step back from. The space around Stephen tightened. It wasn't just the 3 men anymore. Others had slowed their steps, angled their bodies, formed a loose ring that felt accidental but wasn't in prison. Curiosity was currency. Everyone wanted to see how this would end. Stephen felt the shift and adjusted without looking, his awareness expanding to include the crowd, the guards' positions, the exits. He didn't rush. Rushing made mistakes. The tall bully moved first, stepping into Stephen's path, chest out, chin lifted. "You got real brave all of a sudden," he said. The restless one hovered to the side, fingers twitching, itching for permission. The conductor stayed back, eyes sharp, letting his dogs test the fence. Stephen kept his hands visible, palms loose. He knew the script they wanted him to follow. He refused to read it. "You think that calm thing works in here?" The tall one pressed. He leaned closer, breath heavy, trying to crowd Stephen's balance. Stephen shifted half a step. Not back, not forward, just enough to keep space. That small denial stung more than a shove. Laughter rippled from the edge of the circle, then died when Stephen didn't react. The restless one reached out and flicked Stephen's sleeve. "Say it louder," he taunted. "Say, move back again." Stephen didn't repeat himself. He lowered his gaze to the man's hand, then lifted it back to his eyes. It was a quiet exchange, but it carried weight. The restless one felt it and bristled. He took another step in, shoulder rolling, posture aggressive. This was the moment they wanted, the moment where adrenaline decided, instead of reason. Stephen breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. He had learned long ago that fear and anger shared the same doorway. You couldn't let either in. He kept his voice steady. This doesn't need to happen. The conductor laughed from behind them. Everything in here needs to happen, he said. That's how we learn. The crowd leaned closer. Somewhere, metal clanged against metal. A guard's radio crackled, still no intervention. Lessons, after all. The tall bully reached out and poked Stephen's chest with 2 fingers. You gonna teach us something, old man. Stephen didn't slap the hand away. He didn't grab it. He let it rest there for half a second longer than expected, then gently moved it aside, just enough to reclaim his space. The motion was smooth, almost polite. It infuriated them. That's it. The restless one snapped. He lunged. Not a punch. Not yet. Just a hard step meant to shove, to force Stephen to stumble and give the crowd what it wanted. Stephen turned with the motion, redirecting rather than resisting. The shove lost its power before it finished. The restless one caught himself, surprised, eyes wide. The circle went quiet. The conductor's smile faded. He stepped forward now, voice hardening. You think you're slick, he said. You think? Stephen raised a hand, palm out. Not a threat, a boundary. Last warning, he said. Warnings in prison were currency too. Spend them carefully, or don't spend them at all. The tall bully scoffed. You don't give warnings here. He swung. Not full force, but enough to make a point. Stephen moved with it, not against it. The blow skimmed air. Stephen's foot placement changed again, subtle and precise, putting him exactly where he needed to be. The bullies felt it now. The way the energy in the yard shifted. Something was wrong. The easy prey wasn't easy. They hesitated, just a fraction. Pause, right here. If I were in Stephen's place, surrounded, adrenaline pumping, I'd be telling myself this. Don't rush. Don't show anger. Let them make the mistake. I'd keep my hands open, my breathing slow, and I'd wait for the moment when their impatience beats their control. Because that's the opening. Now, it's your turn. Write it in your own words. The conductor saw the hesitation and hated it. He barked a short command, sharp and ugly. The restless one obeyed, stepping in again, this time grabbing for Stephen's shoulder. That was the line. Not because it hurt, but because it committed them. Stephen's body responded before thought. He pivoted, guiding the grip past him, turning the attacker's momentum into a stumble. It wasn't a throw, not yet. It was a demonstration, a warning written in movement. The restless one staggered, barely staying upright, shock written across his face. The yard exploded in noise. Gasps, curses, excited murmurs. The tall bully froze, recalculating. The conductor's jaw tightened. He had pushed too far, too fast. Stephen stood centered again, calm, restored, eyes clear. He hadn't struck anyone. He hadn't broken anything. But the message was unmistakable. This wasn't fear. This was restraint. The conductor took one more step forward, anger winning over caution. You're done, he said. Stephen didn't answer. He adjusted his stance, just slightly. And in that instant, everyone watching understood the truth they'd missed from the start. The bullies hadn't cornered a weak man. They had walked themselves into a trap. The conductor stopped just short of Stephen, close enough that the heat of his anger could be felt. His authority, carefully built through intimidation and spectacle, was cracking, and he knew it. The yard had gone quiet again, but it wasn't the obedient quiet he relied on. It was the kind that watches, measures, waits. You think you proved something, the conductor said, lowering his voice so only Stephen could hear. Out here, that gets people hurt. Stephen didn't rise to the bait. He kept his eyes level, his posture relaxed but rooted. I didn't prove anything, he replied. You did. That landed harder than any insult. The conductor straightened, jaw flexing, and turned slightly, so the others could hear him again. He needed witnesses. Bullies always did. "You see this?" he shouted. "Man thinks he's special." A few uneasy laughs answered him. Not the roar he wanted. The tall bully shifted his feet, uncertainty creeping into his stance. He glanced at the restless one, who was still rubbing his shoulder, shock giving way to embarrassment. The easy confidence they'd started with was gone. Every instinct told them this wasn't going according to plan. Stephen felt it too. The tension had changed shape. This was the dangerous part. Not the first shove, not the loud threats, but the moment when pride refused to retreat. He knew what came next if no one stepped in. A guard at the far edge of the yard finally noticed the crowd. He slowed, hand resting near his radio, eyes narrowing. He didn't intervene yet, he watched. In prison, outcomes often decided whether rules applied. The conductor made his move. He circled Stephen, slow and deliberate, like a man inspecting a purchase. "You're calm," he said. "I don't like calm. Calm hides things." Stephen turned with him, never crossing his feet, never losing alignment. "Then stop looking," he said evenly. The crowd reacted to that. An audible intake of breath, a ripple of murmurs. It wasn't disrespectful. It was confident. Confidence was contagious. The conductor's face hardened. He nodded once, a signal. The tall bully understood immediately. He stepped in from Stephen's blind side, arms coming up, intent clear. This wasn't posturing anymore. This was escalation. Stephen felt the shift and moved at the same time. He didn't rush. He didn't strike. He angled his body, letting the grab slide, then anchored his weight and redirected. The tall bully's balance broke instantly. His own momentum betrayed him. He stumbled forward, nearly colliding with the conductor. Gasps burst from the crowd. Someone swore under their breath. The guard took another step closer. The conductor shoved the tall bully aside, furious now, not just at Stephen, but at his own men for looking weak. "Eno," he snapped. Though his voice wavered, he raised a finger at Stephen. "You don't touch my people." Stephen met his gaze. "Then don't send them," he said. That was the moment control truly slipped. The conductor lunged, not clean, not skilled. Pure anger driving the movement. He grabbed for Stephen's collar, trying to turn the situation into a messy brawl where numbers would decide everything. Stephen responded decisively. He caught the wrist, rotated his body, and stepped in, not to hurt, but to end it. The motion was fast but controlled, practiced but restrained. The conductor's grip dissolved as pressure found its mark. His knees buckled, breath leaving him in a sharp exhale. Stephen guided him down, not slamming him, just placing him where he could no longer threaten anyone. Silence hit the yard like a wall. The conductor knelt, stunned, pain flashing across his face, not from injury, but from realization. He wasn't in charge anymore. Not here. Not now. Stephen stepped back immediately, hands open, distancing himself. He didn't loom. He didn't posture. He gave space, an unmistakable signal that the conflict was over unless someone chose to continue it. No one did. The tall bully stared at the ground. The restless one took 2 steps back. Palms raised. The crowd shifted, no longer a circle, but a loose scatter of bodies unsure where to look. The guard finally closed the distance, radio lifting toward his mouth. "What's going on here?" the guard demanded. The conductor struggled to his feet, pride wounded deeper than his body. He looked at Stephen, then at the watching inmates, then at the guard. For a long second, he said nothing. Stephen spoke first. "Nothing," he said calmly. "It's done." The guard studied him, eyes sharp, then glanced at the others. No one contradicted him, no one dared. The guard nodded once. "Clear out," he ordered. The crowd obeyed, dispersing in fragments, excitement, buzzing low but restrained. As they moved away, whispers followed Stephen. Not mocking now, but cautious, impressed, curious. The conductor backed off without another word, his authority diminished in a way that couldn't be fixed with threats. Stephen exhaled slowly as the space opened around him. He hadn't come looking for a fight. He hadn't wanted one. But he understood something clearly now. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The yard never truly returned to normal after that. Even as the last onlookers drifted away and the guard resumed his patrol, a subtle tension lingered in the air. an unspoken acknowledgement that something irreversible had happened. Stephen felt it as he walked toward the far bench near the fence, the place he'd chosen earlier for its quiet. It wasn't quiet anymore, but it was his. He sat, elbows resting on his knees, breathing slow and measured. He replayed the encounter once, not to dwell, but to learn. In environments like this, lessons weren't optional. They were survival. He knew the conductor wouldn't forget the humiliation. Men like that didn't. They collected slights like debts. A shadow fell across the ground in front of him. Stephen looked up to see an older inmate, gray threading through his hair, posture relaxed but eyes alert. He didn't crowd. Stephen's space. He stopped a respectful distance away. "You handled that clean," the man said quietly. Stephen nodded once, didn't want trouble. The man gave a faint smile. "Funny thing, trouble wanted you." They shared a moment of understanding. The man introduced himself simply, no last name, no background. In here, those details mattered less than reputation. Word moves fast, he continued, especially when someone flips the script. Stephen glanced toward the center of the yard. The conductor and his crew were gone, but their absence spoke louder than their presence had. "That's not always a good thing," Stephen said. "No," the man agreed, "but sometimes it's necessary." As the older inmate moved on, others began to approach. Not in a rush, not as a crowd. One at a time, a nod, a brief word, a quiet acknowledgement. No praise, no cheering. Just recognition, in prison. That was more valuable than applause. Stephen didn't bask in it, he didn't encourage it. He accepted it and let it pass. Drawing attention was dangerous, but avoiding respect was worse. Across the yard, the conductor stood near the wall, surrounded by his inner circle. His voice was low and sharp, anger barely contained. He pointed once in Stephen's direction, then slammed his fist against the concrete. The tall bully flinched. The restless one avoided eye contact. They were recalibrating, that much was clear. Stephen rose from the bench and began his walk back toward the cell block. He didn't hurry. He didn't check over his shoulder. He moved like a man who belonged exactly where he was. That posture mattered. It told a story before anyone spoke. Halfway there, a guard stepped into his path. Younger than the others, eyes curious rather than hostile. "You okay?" the guard asked. Stephen met his gaze. "I'm fine." The guard hesitated, then nodded. "Keep it that way." As Stephen passed, the guard added quietly, "Not everyone does." Back in the corridor, the noise changed, echoing footsteps, distant shouts, the constant hum of locked doors. Stephen's senses stayed alert. Yards ended. Corridors remembered. Later that evening, as lights dimmed and conversations softened into murmurs, Stephen lay on his bunk, hands folded behind his head. Sleep didn't come easily. He didn't expect it to. He listened instead. To the rhythm of the place, to the movement of men settling into uneasy rest. A voice drifted from the next cell. "You the one from the yard?" Stephen turned his head slightly. "Yeah." There was a pause. "You didn't have to do that," the voice said. Stephen considered the words. "Maybe," he replied. "But it happened." Another pause. "They don't like losing face." "No one does." Silence followed. Heavier now. The unspoken hung between the walls, retaliation testing. The conductor wouldn't let this go unanswered. Not publicly humiliated, not undermined. The next day confirmed it. At breakfast, Stephen noticed the shift immediately. Conversations stopped when he approached. Eyes followed him. Not hostile, not friendly, measuring. The conductor's absence was conspicuous. His crew was there, though, spread out, watching. Stephen sat. Ate slowly, kept his posture open. He didn't rush. He didn't hide. A tray clattered to the floor across the room. A distraction. Then a chair scraped behind him. Stephen didn't turn. The tall bully's voice came from his left, forced casual. "You got lucky yesterday." Stephen swallowed, set his utensil down carefully. "Luck runs out." The bully snorted. "So does calm." Stephen finally looked up, meeting the man's eyes. "So does anger." The bully hesitated, unsure how to respond. Before he could, another voice cut in, firm, authoritative. That's enough. The conductor stood at the end of the table, flanked by 2 guards. His face was set, controlled now. Cold, he looked at Stephen, then at his own man. Sit down, he ordered. The tall bully obeyed immediately. The conductor held Stephen's gaze for a long second. There was no apology there, no forgiveness, just a hard recalculation. Then he turned and walked away. Stephen exhaled slowly. He understood the truth now, clearer than ever. He hadn't just survived a confrontation, he had changed the balance. And balances, once shifted, never stayed still for long. The tension followed Stephen everywhere now. It sat beside him at meals, lingered in corridors, hovered in the yard like a low cloud that refused to move. People didn't bump into him anymore. They adjusted their paths, not out of fear exactly, out of awareness. Awareness was power in a place built on routine and hierarchy. Stephen kept his behavior unchanged. Same pace, same posture, same restraint. He knew better than to let a single incident rewrite who he was. In prison, consistency mattered more than strength. One bad day could undo a month of quiet respect. Late that afternoon, the yard opened again. Stephen stepped outside and immediately felt it. The wrong kind of quiet. Conversations were muted, eyes flicking toward the far gate where a small group of guards stood with someone new. The conductor was there too, arms folded, face unreadable. Stephen's instincts sharpened. New variables were dangerous variables. The gates opened, and 2 men entered the yard. One wore a guard's uniform with higher rank stitched into the shoulder. The other wore civilian clothes, clipboard in hand, eyes observant, missing nothing. An investigator, or worse, someone who decided consequences. The conductor straightened, confidence returning in a controlled, practiced way. This was his element again. Authority, process, power. The group moved through the yard slowly, stopping here and there. The investigator asked quiet questions. Guards answered. Inmates pretended not to listen while hearing everything. Stephen stayed where he was. Eventually, the group approached him. The conductor stopped a few feet away, chin lifted. This is the one, he said, voice neutral but edged. The incident yesterday. The investigator looked at Stephen, then down at his clipboard. Stephen Seagal, he read aloud. Is that correct? Stephen nodded. Yes. The investigator raised an eyebrow slightly. Former law enforcement consultant? A ripple moved through the nearby inmates. Subtle, controlled, but real. Stephen didn't respond immediately. He chose his words carefully. Among other things. The investigator studied him now with fresh interest, martial arts background. Yes. The conductor's jaw tightened. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. The investigator turned to the guard beside him. Did anyone get hurt? No, the guard replied. No injuries reported. The investigator nodded, then looked back at Stephen. Witnesses say you showed restraint. Stephen met his gaze. That was the goal. The investigator closed his folder halfway. You could have escalated. I didn't. A long pause followed. The yard felt frozen around them. Then the investigator said the words that shifted everything. You're known for Aikido, correct? The name carried weight. Not because everyone understood it, but because Stephen did, and because the conductor suddenly realized exactly who he'd underestimated. Yes, Stephen said calmly. Aikido emphasizes control, de-escalation. Murmurs spread now, no longer contained. A few inmates exchanged looks, others leaned in. The conductor's authority visibly cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. This wasn't just a tough inmate anymore. This was a man trained to end violence without spectacle. The investigator nodded slowly. That explains the reports. He turned to the conductor. From what I'm hearing, your people initiated contact. The conductor bristled. They were maintaining order. Order doesn't require provocation, the investigator replied evenly. The silence that followed was brutal. The investigator made a note on his clipboard. This will be reviewed. The conductor opened his mouth to argue, then stopped himself. He glanced around, at the watching inmates, at the guards, at Stephen standing calmly in the center of it all. For the first time, the power dynamic had fully flipped. The investigator turned back to Stephen. "You're being moved," he said. A murmur surged, confusion, speculation. "To a different unit," the investigator clarified. "Less volatiles." Stephen nodded once. No relief. No triumph, just acceptance. As the group moved away, the conductor remained behind, staring at Stephen. There was no anger now, only calculation and something else, regret. Stephen held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. The moment didn't belong to either of them anymore. It belonged to everyone who had watched the truth unfold. At this point, if I were Stephen, I'd be thinking one thing: stay disciplined. This is the most dangerous moment, not the fight, but the recognition. I'd avoid celebrating, avoid talking, avoid explaining myself to anyone who didn't need an explanation. I'd let actions speak and silence protect me. Know your turn. Be specific. If you were in Stephen's place right now, knowing your identity is out and eyes are on you, what would you do differently? That night, as Stephen packed his few belongings, word spread faster than lockdown alarms. The story had evolved. It wasn't just about bullies anymore. It was about the moment they realized who they had chosen to test. As Stephen was escorted down a different corridor, past unfamiliar faces, he understood something deeply. The yard had been the beginning. What came next would decide everything. By the time Stephen reached his new unit, the story of yesterday's yard incident had already traveled through every corridor and block. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Not mockery, not fear exactly, but respect tempered with awe. In a place built on hierarchy, reputation moved faster than guards, faster than paperwork, and certainly faster than punishment. Stephen didn't seek it, but he carried it anyway. Quietly, like a shadow that refused to be ignored. He entered the new unit and was shown to his cell. The room was small, dimly lit, and plain. But he didn't need luxury. He needed calm. He settled his few belongings neatly on the bunk, sitting down to collect his thoughts. Every movement he made seemed measured, deliberate, and unhurried. That calmness alone made the other inmates pause, studying him with curiosity. Outside, the yard had returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of what happened lingered. The bullies, once loud and confident, were now quiet, careful, calculating. Their eyes still followed him when he passed. But there was caution where arrogance had been. The conductor, once brash and unchallenged, had been forced to recalibrate his approach, his authority subtly undermined by a man who refused to play the expected game. Word of Stephen's restraint and skill had spread far beyond the yard. By mid-afternoon, even guards and higher-ranking officers were discussing the encounter, impressed by the precision and control with which Stephen handled what could have been a dangerous confrontation. Social hierarchy, they realized, was not always enforced by aggression. Sometimes discipline and calculated skill spoke louder than fists. As the day wore on, Stephen continued his routine quietly, attending meals, interacting when necessary, and maintaining a watchful awareness. He didn't seek confrontation, but neither did he avoid it if provoked. The reputation he had earned yesterday followed him silently, changing the way the new unit viewed him. Inmates who might have once tested him now gave space, understanding that judgment based on appearances could be fatal. Later, as the lights dimmed and the unit quieted for the night, Stephen lay on his bunk reflecting. The truth was clear. Survival wasn't about fighting every battle. It was about choosing which battles mattered, controlling how they unfolded, and teaching lessons without needless violence. In this environment, he had done just that. The bullies had learned that underestimating someone could be catastrophic. The conductor had learned that arrogance could be checked by quiet mastery, and the rest of the prison had learned that real power was silent, disciplined, and controlled. Even as he closed his eyes, the lesson wasn't complete for everyone else. Stories of what happened, retold in whispers, in private corners, between cautious glances, were spreading. By morning, the encounter would be part of prison lore, a cautionary tale of restraint, intelligence, and calculated action. Stephen didn't need to speak. The story itself would teach. If you believe real strength isn't measured by shouting, but by calm control, by choosing the right moment to act, like this video now. Drop a comment sharing your perspective. If I were in Stephen's place, I would subscribe for more intense, real power stories that prove sometimes the quietest actions speak the loudest. By the end of the week, Everyone who had witnessed the incident understood something simple but profound. Underestimating someone based on appearance, silence, or age is the biggest mistake you can make. The bully's mistake, the conductor's miscalculation, and the chaos of expectation all faded in comparison to one man's discipline. Steven Seagal had not just survived. He had taught a lesson that would echo far beyond that day, far beyond that yard. And in the quiet corridors of that prison, a legend was born, one measured not in aggression, but in controlled, undeniable skill. The yard would remember. The inmates would remember. Even the guards would remember. And anyone foolish enough to test him again would remember, before they even tried. In a world built on intimidation, calm mastery was the ultimate weapon.